Chapter 9. Perceived Shortcomings. Zenitsu wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes as he ran, determined to keep a stiff upper lip. He hated leaving you on bad terms like that.
You looked so worried when he walked out the door.
But he couldn't stand to be in your presence a moment longer. Not after what you had just said. Humbled was one word that could be used to describe the pain in Zenitsu's heart right now. But that still didn't seem quite deep or convicting enough to do it justice. Now that he thought about it, the feeling was probably closer to shame than anything else. He had been cut to the quick in a way he couldn't describe. Yet, surprisingly enough, he wasn't even hurt by your rejection of his marriage proposal. Instead, he was stunned, astounded by the boundless range of his own selfishness. He was stranded in an open field of it, with no one and nothing else in sight for miles in every direction. If asked point blank, he would have denied it. But the ugly truth of why he'd been dawdling around his suspicions of the Oiran were clear. He got caught up in it. In all of it. In the warm domesticity of mundane routine, in the minor ways the girls needed him, basking in what he presumed it must have felt like to have a family. But his very definition had been stripped bare in that tea house, fully exposed for the empty black hole it truly was. That ache in your heart he heard when you looked up at him, afraid of leaving him behind. It was in that instant he finally understood. That was what a family was. Not his selfish need for comfort, but a noble desire to raise up your own, making sacrifices for one another. It was clear from your conversation that you'd rather slog through the mud alongside them than waltz effortlessly through the rest of your life in their absence. It was duty. It was obligation. It was work. Loyalty unwavering and resolute in the face of adversity. Such a thing was bright and shining in his eyes, and Zenitsu knew he could no longer settle for anything less than something so real. After you'd exposed his hollow existence, dragged it kicking and screaming into the sunlight, he knew he wasn't worthy, couldn't bear another kind glance from you in that tea house. And he knew for damn sure he couldn't face you again until he'd done his true duty, one that he owed to you and all the other girls here from the start. Not only that, but your literal choice of words had sparked a second realization in him as well. Sweep me away. It struck a peculiar chord of significance in him when you said it, and it was more than just the parallel concept of girls being swept away in the night. Ah! And then he remembered. The evening of his first hosting event, when he had to play the koto for Momo. That unsettling sweeping sound passed outside his room. It was a slithering of fabric, no louder than the casual brushstroke of calligraphy on parchment. Back then he had assumed the Oiran was just impressive, exceptionally trained in her ability to walk so silently and gracefully. But deep down, he knew the sound was otherworldly. So why? Why hadn't he pursued that? He knew the answer immediately. Because he had fallen prey to arguably the greatest of his many, many weaknesses. And that was love. Zenitsu wanted to kick himself. Isn't this how his life began? Getting involved with a woman in debt and paying it off in sweat, blood, and tears? So many tears! But this was different. Since then he'd learned to discern between those he could and couldn't trust. You weren't just using him to an end like she did. No. You had a kind and genuine heart. You truly cared for him, as you did Chiyo and Momo and Omitsu. The Oiran was kidnapping the girls using her obi, which must have been endowed with some sort of demonic power, silencing screams, muffling struggle, and that explained why he didn't hear the altercation even while he was staying there. The reason such a profound revelation didn't hit him as hard as Gramps Kane was because he must have known it from the beginning. His chest stirred with far more guilt than fear, for it was evident that his own lack of gumption was as big of a danger to you and the others as the Oiran herself. But that wouldn't be so any longer. These girls were being abused, stolen, and he couldn't wait another moment. Tonight, with the help of his friends, he would uproot the tyrannical woman, beg your forgiveness, and propose to you properly. And if you wouldn't have him, he'd see to it that you took the Oiran's place, rose to meet your dreams. Or at least that's what he told himself anyway. He knew in reality if you rejected him, he'd likely bawl and plead and grovel until you caved in and said yes. After this whole thing, he recognized he wasn't noble enough for all that. But he at least wasn't bad enough to allow his selfish desires to guide his actions any longer. Not at the expense of any more disappearances. No more innocence would be affected. Not on his watch. Zenitsu would have told you the truth there and then, but he had to catch Tanjiro before he left the market. Had to tell him to call upon Tengen, and let him know that the demon was here.
I think I know who it is, but I need another opinion. Come to the Kyogoku house tonight after dark. I won't make a move until you get there.
Once the game was set, of course Zenitsu had no intention of leaving you unattended.
Especially not with that good-looking waiter around.
You were probably mad at him for abandoning you, so he wouldn't show himself and antagonize you further. But he'd make sure you got home safely. He heard you calling his name, but resisted showing himself. It was easy to keep a good distance as he already knew your sounds. Your heartbeat, your voice, your footsteps.
Maybe she went home already,
he heard you say after scouring the emptying marketplace. Good, she's headed back. Zenitsu took care to arrive just before you did, to guarantee you wouldn't face any trouble from losing track of him. He could apologize to you later. For now, he had to examine that mural. It was still daylight, so perhaps he could get away with sneaking into the Oiran's room to investigate.
Surely she wouldn't risk a battle with such a heavy disadvantage. Right?
Zenitsu gulped as he descended the stairs, wishing he had his sword at his hip right about now.
Or better yet, Tanjiro or Inosuke to protect him.
But he knew they wouldn't arrive for several more hours, so he had to be careful. Slowly coming up on the mural, Zenitsu's fears were made manifest, and a full-body shiver took him from the ground up. The danger down here was palpable.
What is this?
The once contained composition had grown to span beyond the door itself. The bloody wizened tree seemed to be breathing, glowing red paint pulsing through its branches, and Zenitsu could hear the groan of stretching and compressing wood beneath his feet. It rendered him too petrified to take another step. How had this been overlooked? No, it had been too gradual, most likely. To someone passing day by day, they might not notice a tiny amount of change. But he hadn't been here since his first night. Out of apprehension, he'd been intentionally avoiding it. But before he could unmask the secrets of this phenomenon, he heard a tiny sniffle behind it. Zenitsu didn't think before acting. He thrust the door open in an instant. Before his eyes was a dark room in absolute disarray. Vases smashed, bed cushions scattered about, wooden wall beams hanging askew off their nails. And right in the center of it all was little Momo, huddled on the floor crying.
What? Were you in a fight? Are you okay?
He barked out, which only made her sob harder. Hopping over to Bree, he knelt by her side, placing his hands on her tiny shoulders.
Hey, I wasn't angry with you, all right? Sorry about that.
That was the second time today he'd inadvertently snapped at someone he cared about. He really ought to be gentler from now on.
If you're in some kind of trouble... Huh.
In one heartbeat he knew. The battle would start sooner than he'd anticipated. It wasn't even dark yet, but behind him resonated a sound so terrifying and clear, fully unmuted by his surroundings. This volatile force of nature inflicted a staggering pressure behind his eyes, and its aura of menacing intent was overwhelming him from all angles. How had he not noticed it sooner? This was the power of an upper-rank demon. Upon returning home, you were greeted as per usual. Carrying the groceries down towards the kitchen, you scanned faces for Zenko. Nobody had noticed you arriving without her. Or, at least if they had, they didn't bother to say anything. It wasn't as though you could ask the maidservant or new manager if they'd seen her, or they'd immediately know you broke the new pairs-only rule. Fortunately, you came upon just the person you could ask.
Chiyo.
You spoke in hushed tones, leaning your shoulder against hers while she rinsed vegetables.
Has Zenko-chan come home yet?
Yeah, she got back a little bit ago. I think she went downstairs. Your friend took note of your relieved expression and asked, Was she not with you?
Oh, no, she was.
You lied.
We just got separated in the crowd on our walk back, so I was just making sure.
Huh? A loud noise from below almost rumbled a nearby vase off its table. Is the Oiran up and about already? Sounds like she knocked over a bookshelf this time. You jested darkly.
I hope nobody got hurt,
Chiyo replied, and your mood turned more somber.
Actually, Chiyo, to tell you the truth, me and Zenko had an argument, I think.
She set her task aside and looked at you.
Oh, what about? I'm not so sure, to be honest with you.
Actually, you had no idea how to describe the bizarre and intense escalation of your tea house conversation. Maybe it's that time of the month for her? I know that makes me emotional sometimes.
Could be. But I think I said something wrong.
Your first instinct was to go and apologize to her. She had brought you candy when she thought you were mad. So maybe you should do the same? What was the nature of her question, though? It had so much weight to it.
If I was a man...
Traveler! Traveler, come quick!
Huh?
Tiny hands were gripping your arm, pulling you towards the door.
It's my fault! It's all my fault!
Whoa, slow down, Momo! You placed a hand over hers, noticing her tear-stained face, and also a trickle of red slipping down her jawline.
Oh my gosh! Why is your ear bleeding? It's Zenko-chan! Come with me!
Hastily, she guided you down the side stairs, following the long sigil's obi until you reached the Oiran's room. Your stomach sank when you caught sight of the collateral damage. The Fusuma had been knocked clear off its tracks, and was sitting flat in the center of the hallway. You deduced the stakes of the situation immediately. With that amount of destruction lying in your wake, there was no way someone had not sustained a serious injury. Upon rounding the corner into the room across the hall, you saw Zenko sprawled on the floor, Hana and Kana by her side. The slider was hanging off its hinges in this room too, which had to mean...
She hit her through 2 doors? How is that even possible?
She was too heavy to move, so I went and fetched a blanket and some pillows for her.
Momo's voice rang rueful, but you knew that was true. A forceful hug or two from Zenko had confirmed that statement before you even needed to test it. You knew you'd have no luck attempting to move her either.
Zenko-chan!
You knelt at the edge of the blanket draped over her, and touched her shoulder gently.
Zenko-chan, wake up!
It's no use. She's out cold. A voice rang with familiar depravity, from a presence that had been lurking just across the hall, wreathed in shadow. The sheer lack of penitence in her tone was expected, but somehow this time it set something ablaze in you. A disciplinary bruise here and there was one thing, but to recklessly deal such a devastating blow to someone so good-natured was enough to make you tremble with rage. Tensions were running high in the tiny space, and you could feel her cat-like yellow stare bore into your back. What did she do? You demanded, not asked, and Warabahime's eyes flashed sharp. She put her hands on me without permission. Her answer was simple but vile, and you whipped your head around to look at her.
Zenko-chan would never!
You calling me a liar? The air shivered between you.
and more than anything you wanted to launch yourself at the heartless woman. Your jaw set, and you clenched your fist in the duvet, teetering on the edge of an outburst.
It's not a lie, Traveler!
Momo tugged at your sleeve once more, intervening before things got ugly.
She was punishing me for not cleaning fast enough, and Zenko tried to stop her. It was my fault.
There, you see. The Oiran punctuated her words with a condescending tilt of the head. Next time, mind yourself before you go accusing us of things. And just like that, she walked away, leaving the four of you to clean up her mess. You would have made an attempt to get the last word in, but were too taken aback by the way she phrased that.
Us? What did she mean by that?
You looked down at your dear friend and softened. A welt was forming on her cheek, even more red and inflamed than it had been when she took the hit for you. You patted her hair gently, and she let out a little in response, almost like she could sense you were there. You would have smiled at the sound, had you not been so busy fretting over the extent of her injuries.
Zenko-chan will be so happy you tried to defend her.
Momo chirped out of the blue. Huh? You think so? Certainly. Kana answered for her.
She talks about you all the time.
Oh?
She goes on and on about how protective you are of all of us, and how she thinks she'll be a great mother someday.
Her words struck you right in the heart, and you averted your eyes to the floor. Yes, she does seem to think I'm suited for that role. Though you were certain you'd done nothing noble enough to warrant that opinion from her. Since the day you met, she'd witnessed you carelessly fumble with your words, succumb to unfounded suspicions, and sneak out of the Okiya with violent intent. The fact that she thought anything positive of you at all was truly a testament to her quality of character. How she always saw the good in others, no matter how little there was to be found. But now was not the time for self-reflection, you realized. You needed to tackle the situation at hand. Anyway, something to eat might perk her up when she wakes up. So why don't you two fix her something in the kitchen? You pointed to Hana and Kana. Grab something for the pain as well. Momo, why don't you fetch a cool compress for her cheek? And while you're at it, get something on that ear of yours before you pass out. I have some bandages in my room. I'll go get them and meet you back here.
Whatever you say, Mom.
You chuckled once through your nose before making your way down the hall, back towards your room. Huh? Where am I? Zenitsu's eyes slowly opened, and he hissed at the sudden pain in his cheek when his senses returned.
You're outside, Zenko-chan.
One of the three triplets answered. Outside? Darkness had fallen, and he noticed a bit of smoke dissipating into the mostly clear sky. Why? Are we outside?
There was some kind of explosion, so the manager had us all evacuate.
Explosion? He sat up abruptly, noting the bandages on the side of Momo's cute face. Is your ear okay?
Yes, thanks to you, Zenko-chan.
He smiled weakly at her, relieved she didn't receive any worse after he'd fallen unconscious. That was a serious hit. If he had any doubts as to the Oiran's true nature before, he certainly didn't have any now. He glanced around the dim street, seeing a huddle of his housemates standing idly by. They appeared to be unharmed, which made him happy. He could never forgive himself if he let his guard down and something happened while he was sleeping. Was it a kitchen fire?
No. We think it started upstairs somehow.
Upstairs? His brows knit into a line now. Something wasn't right. What would cause an explosion upstairs? Zenitsu started getting nervous as he scanned faces and sounds, unable to locate the one he was looking for. He fired quick glances to the rooftops, yet saw no sign of Tanjiro or Inosuke yet either.
We don't know. We tried to get in while we were evacuating,
But the door was barricaded shut.
Zenitsu's heart was beating heavy now. He was afraid to ask, as he didn't want to hear the answer. But he knew he needed to anyway. What room was it?
Room 8.
To be continued. Yeehaw! Next chapter is the finale, y'all. I'll see you there.